Hello everyone, and welcome to our first look at March of the Machine. So today at Pro Tour Philadelphia, there was a panel discussion as part of the Magic events of the day, and we got our first look at March of the Machine. So we got a number of cards to look at from the set, and some of the new mechanics that we're going to see in the set. And without further ado, let's get started with that. But special thanks to Caffeinated Gamer for sponsoring these videos and making this content available to you. So let's look at our previews from March of the Machine. So our first card is Helio, the Radiant Dawn. For 2 and 2 white mana, we get a legendary enchantment creature god. That's a 4/4, and when Helio, the Radiant Dawn, enters the battlefield, return target enchantment card that isn't a god from your graveyard to your hand. So that in and of itself, I feel like makes this a playable card in an enchantment deck. And now we don't know how many other enchantment cards we're going to see from March of the Machine, but we definitely have a number of legendary or enchantment creatures that go from the Kamigawa set and a few other cards here and there. So I think this is going to be something that those decks will want to play regardless of the backside of it. So you can also transform Helio, the Radiant Dawn, for 3 and a Phyrexian blue mana, and you can only activate this as a sorcerer, but when you do, you get Helio, the Warped Eclipse, and you may cast spells as though they had flash. So that's a really powerful ability. So now you can cast your creatures, your sorceries on your opponent's turn, and have a really powerful impact on the game state because of that. In addition to that, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card your opponent has drawn this turn. So basically every turn, when it's your opponent's turn, you're going to have your spells reduced by at least 1 mana. So now everything is 1 mana less, so that's going to make it possible to get more cards out on your opponent's turn, which I think is going to be a really, really powerful ability. So I look at Helio, the Radiant Dawn, and I think this is going to have a place in Standard. Now, how much of a place will really depend on what else we're going to see in a set. But this is certainly a good card for Standard. Next, we have Fairy Mastermind. For 1 and a blue mana, you get a Fairy Rogue that's a 2/1 with flash and flying. And whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. And it's 3 for 3 and a blue mana, each player draws a card. So basically for 4 mana, you draw 2, your opponent draws 1. So that's a nice ability. And this is Yuta Takahashi's World Championship 27 card. And if we look back at previous World Championship cards, what we'll find is all of them tend to be cards that are good in Standard. So I expect Fairy Mastermind to be good as well. Next, we have Jenga Taxes. For 3 and 2 blue mana, you get a legendary creature. That's a Phyrexian Praetor. It's a 5/5. It's got Ward 2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, draw a card. So just on that, Jenga Taxes is a pretty good card. And then when you want to, you can exile Jenga Taxes, then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, and you can again activate this only as a sorcery, only if you have 7 or more cards in your hand. So for 4 mana, you get to transform Jenga Taxes into the Great Synthesis. So what we're going to see are cards like we saw with Helio that are creatures on both sides, but you have to transform them to get to the Phyrexian version. And then with our Creators, we're going to see sagas on the backside. So on Chapter 1, you get to draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. You have no maximum hand size for as long as you control the Great Synthesis. So basically, to transform Jenga Taxes, you have to have 7, so you're going to draw 7 when you transform him. So that's a really powerful ability on its own. And then on Chapter 2, you're going to return all non-Phyrexian creatures to their owner's hands. So that also means that Jin's going to need to be in a Phyrexian deck, most likely, so you can avoid that ability hurting you. On Chapter 3, you may cast any number of spells from your hand without paying their mana cost, and exile the Great Synthesis, then return it to the battlefield front face up, and you get Jenga Taxes back. So that's the thing about the Saga cycle that we're going to see, is that you transform it, you get the Saga, you play it through the 3 chapters, and then you get the creature back. You get the Praetor back, which I think is going to be a really powerful thing. And I think Jenga Taxes is going to be a very played card in Standard. 5 mana, based on all the mid-range decks that we're seeing currently, isn't too much. So I think we're going to see Jenga Taxes as a card that sees a good deal of play in Standard. Next, we have Moment of Truth, our only comment of the day. And for 1 and a blue mana, you get an instant that looks at the top 3 cards of your library. You put 1 of those cards into your hand, 1 into your graveyard, and 1 on the bottom of your library. So this is kind of an interesting way to draw a card. It's similar to Impulse, but you get the advantage of being able to put 1 of those cards into your graveyard. So in a Graveyard Matters deck, I think this is a very nice draw spell, because you can kind of curate your graveyard, putting something you want to get back into it. Next, we have Breach the Multiverse. So kind of the symbolic breaching of the multiverse by the Phyrexians. For 5 mana and 2 black, you get this sorcery. Each player mills 10 cards. For each player, choose a creature or planeswalker card in that player's graveyard. Put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. Then each creature you control becomes a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So this would actually work pretty well with Jenga Taxes on that Chapter 2 ability, where you want to have Phyrexians in play on your side, and you want to see no Phyrexians on the opponent's side. So it's, in essence, a one-directional board wipe. My problem with Breach is this. It's 7 mana. Now, 7 mana right now in Standard is something that is attainable, but it's really going to be hard to get there, I think, in the long run. So while I like the card and what it does, the ability to get a creature and a planeswalker out of your graveyard and get a creature or a planeswalker out of your opponent's graveyard, that's a really powerful ability. But I don't know if there's enough here in terms of being able to play that 7 mana cost. Certainly in Limited, this will be a bomb, as most of the cards that we're going to talk about today would be really good in Limited. All right, next we have Chandra, Hope's Beacon. For 4 and 2 red mana, you get the legendary Planeswalker Chandra with 5 loyalty. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. So 6 mana is a high mana cost, and I think that in and of itself is going to make it really hard to play Chandra in Standard. But if we do see her as a 1 or 2 copy of Index, she does have her +2 ability that adds 2 mana in any combination of colors. For +1, you get to exile the top 5 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may cast an instant or sorcery from among those exile cards. So you don't have to do it on your turn. You can wait until your opponent's turn. So that's a nice thing. Until your end of your next turn, you get to see that. So it gives you kind of a turn and a half to use those cards, or one of those cards. And then for -X, Chandra Hope's Beacon deals X damage to each of up to 2 targets. So you can, and that can be your opponent, and also then a creature or some combination of those, or even a planeswalker. So that -5 ability I think is pretty good, because basically you get to do 10 damage for -X potentially if you just play Chandra and then -5 or to do 5 damage to your opponent, 5 damage to a creature or a planeswalker. That in and of itself is a pretty good ability. But like I said, I think this is probably too expensive to see in Standard, because red really doesn't want to go more than 4 mana on a card. And because of that, I think it's just going to be very difficult for it to be played in Standard. Next we have Omnath Locus of All. So for a white mana, a blue mana, a black Phyrexian mana, a red and a green, you get the legendary creature. That's a Phyrexian elemental. That's a 4/4. If you would lose mana, unspent mana, that mana becomes black instead. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card if it has 3 or more colored mana symbols in its mana cost. If you do, add 3 mana in any combination of its colors and put it into your hand. If you don't, reveal it, put it into your hand. So basically what Omnath does here is at the beginning of your first main phase, you get to draw a card. Great ability. So basically Omnath is going to say you get 2 cards per turn. And when you draw a card that has 3 different mana color symbols, you get to add 3 mana to your mana pool as well. So I can see Omnath seeing play in Standard because we already have a number of cards that are 4 and even 5 mana that occasionally are seeing play. Because of the triomes that we have from Streets of New Capenna, there's not really much difficulty to get to 5 overall mana that are 5 different colors to cast this in Standard. So because of that, I think this is something that at least marginally we'll see play in Standard. All right, next we have our partners. So one of the themes of the March of the Machines is going to be 2 characters from previous sets coming together on one card to form a legendary creature. So our first one is Drana and Limbala. For 1 and 2 white and a black mana, you get a legendary creature that's a vampire and an angel, giving you each of their creature types. That's a 3/4. It has flying, it has vigilance, and activated abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. And Drana and Limbala have all activated abilities of all creatures your opponent control. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate those abilities. So first of all, I do see some Standard playability for Drana and Limbala. There's already a good Orzhov Angels decks or even a Mardu Angel deck that we're seeing out there. So I think because of that, this card fits kind of right into that deck, and I think in a pretty good place for it as well. So I think we'll see that in that deck. But I think in terms of Commander, this is a really strong card because being able to shut down your opponent's activated abilities is really nice. And then not only are you shutting them down, you're now getting all of their activated abilities, and you can then activate them yourself. So that in and of itself, I think, is going to make this a popular card for Commander as well. Next, we have Ghalta and Mavrin. For 3, 2 green, and 2 white mana, you get a legendary creature that's a dinosaur vampire. It's a 12/12 with trample. So whenever you attack, you get to choose 1, create a tapped and attacking XX green dinosaur creature token with trample, where X is the greatest power among other attacking creatures. So you have to attack with something else to be able to create the token. And also to do the second thing here, which is create X/1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is a number of other attacking creatures. So you have to attack with more than 1 card to get the activated ability of Ghalta and Mavrin. But you're likely to, and if you're casting this for 7 mana, you're not doing some kind of reanimator shenanigans with it. You're going to have other cards and out there and creatures that you can attack with. So you're going to either create a big dinosaur that has trample, or you're going to create a number of vampires. Either way, that's probably, if it's not a one-shot to kill your opponent, it's going to be pretty close. The bad thing I see about this is it's 7 mana, and you have to untap with it for it to have a place in the game. And because of that, I think that's the drawback of the card. And I think that's probably going to make it fringe Standard playable at best at this point. All right, our last 2 cards of the day are Thalia and the Get Rot Monster. For 1, a white, a black, and a green, you get the legendary creature that's a human frog horror. That's a 4/4. And what makes the card, I think, in my mind, very powerful is it has First Strike and Death Touch. And then you may play an additional land on each of your turns, and creatures and non-basic lands your opponent control enter the battlefield tap. So that's going to be something that's going to slow your opponent down quite a bit. And whenever Thalia and the Get Rot monster attacks, sacrifice a creature or land, then draw a card. So I think if you can draw cards in any deck that we're going to be playing Thalia and the Get Rot monster in, I think then this could be a really powerful attacking creature. If not, it's going to be a really, really good defender. So basically, any card your opponent attacks with, you're going to be able to kill them before it does any damage to you. And that's a really powerful ability. Now, already we have a Golgari deck that's kind of out there, that's Reanimator, and then we're seeing some other stuff with it. So this might be a card that fits into there. Or what we might even see is a deck that just forms around this Thalia and the Get Rotten monster. So I like it. We'll have to see where it fits into Standard. Our last card of the day is probably the meme card of the day, which is Yargle and Mutani. For 3 and 2 black mana and a green mana, you get a legendary creature that's a Frog Spirit Elemental. It's 18/6 with no other abilities. And that's why I feel like it's a meme card. You know, you're combining 2 powerful creatures into one, and for 6 mana, that's a really, really powerful creature, but it doesn't have trample. And if it did, then I think it would be a fantastic Standard card. But because it doesn't, I think it's a card that will see limited play, but probably not much else, unless you find a way to give it haste, or we end up with some kind of card from this set that allows you to sacrifice a creature and do damage equal to its power to something, to your opponent. If we do get that, then this will be a very good card at that, because that's a one-shot, do 18 damage to your opponent. They probably lose a game at that point. All right, so that's our first look at March of the Machines. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please remember to like and subscribe to our content, so you can see further videos like this as we continue in the next coming weeks with more March of the Machine previews. Thanks. I'll see you next time.